Hey everyone, I am here from Narragansett, Rhode Island today, coming to you live on Instagram. I am also actually today simultaneously recording on my computer so that we can archive some of our conversation and be able to share it moving forward. If you're just joining me for these conversations, they've really just been about self-awareness and self-love. And really how we can use these tools in practical ways in our everyday lives so that we can create more ideal lives and really create the kinds of lives that are what our vision for our lives look like, and less of being at the effects of life. So today I had intended to talk about just creating more space in our lives amidst the storms in our lives. Let's see. Hey Norm, how's it going? It's great to hear from you. I love you and I miss you and I am proud of you too. And I've been watching you. So if you're just starting to join me for these conversations, they're really based in the foundation of self-awareness and self-love. And all of that, also self-acceptance, self-respect, integrity, which means, that your words match your actions and that you're not only talking the talk, but you're also walking the walk. So last night here in Narragansett, Rhode Island, there was a really, really crazy storm, literally a storm outside with crazy wind gusts, and I was sitting in the house and listening to all the sounds of the winds taking the trees by force and really kind of even shaking the house in some ways. And just as I was about to fall asleep, I heard a real crash, and it ended up being that upstairs in the house, the wind had caught one of the windows and literally ripped the whole frame of the window off the house, and it shattered onto the deck. And it was the middle of the night. It was like 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning, and I had no way to cover the window, so just had to find a place of presence and just get really present in the situation so that I could be most effective and not get so caught up in the chaos of the storm or the chaos of the wind and the rain. It was literally like raining sideways last night. So, and then so I dealt with it this morning, and before it was late enough for me to start making phone calls, because I wake up at sunrise or before sunrise every day, so a little bit too early for business to start yet. So I went to go grab a cup of coffee, and I took a drive down by the water, and there were telephone poles that were literally just like bent over, and the seagulls were nowhere near the water. Everybody was just kind of trying to take refuge in whatever ways that it could. And so I just really started to think about how nature is really just a reflection for ourselves as humans. And this is true of pretty much anything you look at in nature. And as a songwriter, I often turn to nature as a source of inspiration, because there's not much in nature. There's really nothing in nature that happens that we don't relate to on some level as human beings, because it's really just a reflection of our lives. It's a reflection of our intuition, our instincts, and our emotions. So this morning I was thinking about how, in the midst of the storms in our lives, in the midst of our chaos and our darkness, and when things feel really out of control, just how crucial it is for us to really remain present in these times. And in doing so and finding our peace in the eye of the storm, it's really where we can remain effective and where we can be less affected by the things that are going on around us, and really stay grounded in our truth by remaining present and being able to understand that just like the weather and just like the wind and the rain and the cold and all of these seasons that we experience, just like that, our emotions are just like the weather. So while they're here for the moment and they're very real and they're very intense, they are going to eventually just pass by. And the more that we can just start to observe our emotions instead of getting so enrolled in them and really, feeling so connected to our emotions, the more we can just be more deliberate and start making decisions from a place of peace and a place of presence. Because oftentimes, and I know for me for a number of years, I really got enrolled in the stories of my emotions. And instead of thinking that I had emotions, I thought I was my emotions. I thought that, being sad was not just a feeling that I had, but really was an identity. It was a part of who I was. It really defined me and my everyday life. It really defined the way that I interacted with other people. It defined the way that I was effective or really ineffective in my life, because I allowed my emotions to really get the best of me, instead of understanding that it's perfectly normal to have these emotions. It's perfectly normal to feel anything, whether it is, everything from joy and happiness, which, some of us even have resistance to that. But really to know that all of these feelings, from happiness, joy, sadness, rage, hate, all of these things are totally natural as human beings, and we're going to naturally feel all of these things at some point. And the less that we allow ourselves to be defined by them, the more that we can really still continue to operate in our truth and really continue to have peace in our lives no matter what's going on around us. Because we're all going to face seasons of our lives where things feel out of control, whether it be from losing a loved one, or, from losing a job, or a separation from a loved one, a divorce, whatever it is. We all have seasons of our life of change, and really what it comes down to is that in these times of darkness and these times of turmoil, it's really our responsibility to get really present so that we can remain in command of ourselves and in command of our lives. Because ultimately, we can't control every single thing around us. The only thing that we can control is us. So the more that we can get present and be able to quiet our mind, the more able we are to still be effective, even when everything else seems to kind of be falling apart. Because as I mentioned before, and this is just kind of a universal truth, your thoughts shape your reality. So what you believe to be true is what creates your reality. And what ends up happening is that if you enroll in your thoughts of chaos or sadness or rage or whatever you're feeling, what you end up doing is you end up perpetuating it for the long term, instead of realizing that this is just a temporary thing that's happening, and that you yourself are capable of creating something beyond all of that. And so, like I said, for a number of years, I really enrolled in my sadness. I really enrolled in my feelings of hurt. And all I ended up doing was creating more of it. I literally just kept perpetuating it in my life. And I had the belief that if there was if it weren't for bad luck, I'd have no luck at all, right? So that was my belief. And so what ended up happening was, guess what? Everything that could go wrong went wrong, because I believed that if it could go wrong, it would, because that's what I thought that my life was, and that's what I felt like I created. And because I believed that, and I really, really was invested in that belief, I created so many hardships in my life because I really was aligned with that belief. So just as I was aligned with that belief, it took a long time for me to get out of that belief system, start quieting my mind, and get to a space where I could start to create some new beliefs, and really start to create some new ideas that were more aligned with living a better life and a more joyous life and living a more ideal life. But until I could change my mind, I just kept creating the same situation over and over again, whether it be financially, whether it be in relationships, in my career. I just literally kept creating this string of bad luck, because that's what I believed my life to be. So it's really important to know that also, in contrast to that, in being in this new space where I have a different set of beliefs, it's not to say that bad things don't still happen. Because as I said last night, I'm in the house and all of a sudden the window is ripped off of the house. But the difference is from then to now is that there was a time in my life where that would have happened, and that would have been the end of the world. That literally would have been, just so catastrophic and so devastating. And I just would have it would have ruined my whole day, and I wouldn't have been able to find joy in my day today. I wouldn't be able to find a place to be able to be productive. because I would just be so at the effect of my life that I would be completely really debilitated and incapable of being effective in my own life. So just like last night when when the window came off, I was like, all right, it's the middle of the night. What can I do? So all I can do is the best that I can do. So I turned on all the lights, I saw where there was damage, I moved furniture out of the room, I wiped up the floor. I had nothing to board up the window or block the window from anything, so I just cleaned up everything I could, got it out of the space, and I closed the door, and I came back downstairs and said, you know what, this is the best that I can do for right now until I can call and get some help. And so this is part of, a reflection for ourselves too, to understand that in whatever you're facing and whatever your challenges are, to really just have compassion for yourself and understand that you really are just doing the best that you can. We're all just operating from a place of wherever we're at in this moment. So in doing so, we have more compassion for ourselves, and we're not spending our time like beating ourselves up for what we could have done or should have done. And I always go back to that term, like, don't should all over yourself, because a lot of times we'll get through something and then we'll invest a great deal of time telling ourselves what we should have done. And really that's just a waste of energy too, because all that time that you're spending telling yourself what you could or should have done could just be used moving forward and actually doing something, or moving forward in a new project, or just deciding that this is a new moment and that you're going to start making new decisions from this point on. There's literally nothing you can do about what's already happened. It's already done, it's already happened, and just obsessing about it and thinking about all of the things that it could have played out or what you should have done better is really just not being present. You're just not focused on this moment and how you can effectively make change right now. So if you are just joining, like I said, I actually started simultaneously recording on my computer too, so that I can start sharing some of these conversations for the long term. And today what we're talking about is really just finding peace in the eye of the storm. And like I said, my experience in the storm last night here in Rhode Island really prompted and inspired all of this, because I realized how important it was to use my power of presence to be more effective in the storms of my life, whether that be, like I said, like the loss of someone, a breakup, a loss of a job, a relocation, whatever. We all have these different seasons in our lives that create all these storms, and really there's no avoiding them. Our life is full of change. Every single day is a new experience. You never experience the same day ever twice, ever. You never even experience the same moment twice. You're never going to have the exact same thoughts twice. Like, every single moment is new. And as such, that's where all of our power lies, because the minute something happens, the moment after is your present moment. So, and I've said this before, like just focusing right now, if we just got really just present, get all of our attention out, and just quiet our mind from the inner dialogues that are in our heads, we just realize that, like, here's a moment right now, and it's already gone, right? And so literally we have the power to just recognize each moment for what it is, which is just a blank slate to make a new decision, and to really take our power back. And oftentimes the reason that we lose our power, or maybe we never really had it to begin with, maybe we're so far down that hole that we're still trying to regain our strength or regain our clarity. But in each moment we have an opportunity to just get present and understand that we can start making a new choice right now. You don't have to wait for tomorrow. You don't have to wait for a new week. You don't have to wait for a new month. You don't have to wait for a new year. I know we're like finishing up the year, and like a lot of our stuff, that our goals and everything are tied into 2018. So we're going to wait till 2018 to start a diet, or to try to start dating, or whatever it is that we're putting off. But really, we're just putting off life. And so how valuable would it be to know that no matter what is happening around us, that we really have the power to start making those decisions right now. I have a song called Temporary, and it's on my album called Journey of a Gemini, and every once in a while I'll listen to it just to reflect on what kind of moved through me as a songwriter, to talk about the fact that I said, feeling temporary is a permanent problem, right? So it's kind of just part of the human condition. And so that has a lot of different meanings, really, when you break it down. But when I first started writing that song, I was really depressed, and I just felt kind of replaceable, and like nothing good ever lasted. And so, for me, it was like an eternal problem. It was something that was always going to be, something that I did not know that I could ever find a solution for. But then on the other side of it, once I started going more into a level of self-awareness and self-love, what I recognized about temporary was ironically the exact polar opposite of that. And it was that the beauty of time is that nothing lasts forever. Good, bad, ugly, the storms in our lives, the bad things in our lives, the celebrations of our lives, the victories, the defeats, all of it is incredibly temporary. All of it's really fleeting. So while it's incredibly important for us to celebrate our wins and celebrate our victories, at the same time to know on the other side of that, that with every defeat that we face, with every loss that we face, that also is temporary. Oftentimes it can be really challenging for us to recognize that because we get so wrapped up in that feeling or that emotion, or maybe we just start to identify as being that emotion, that we fail to recognize that it's just like the weather. It's just going to pass by. If we can just become aware of it, it will simply move on. And this is really going back into the idea of self-awareness, is recognizing that all of our emotions are part of being a human being. It's part of the human condition, part of the human experience. And there's nothing that you or I face that we don't face. Like there's nothing that I face that you don't. There's nothing that I feel that you don't. There's nothing that you feel that I don't. At some point in our lives, we may not feel all that stuff at the same time, but during the path of our lives, we all feel these things. But the important thing to know is that we are not those feelings. We are not those emotions. Those are feelings. And like I said, for a long time, I really identified myself as my feelings. I thought that because, that I was depressed, that defined me, that was part of my identity, and that I had to carry that for the rest of my life. And it's similar in terms of like the stories that I had about my parents. And even their stories about themselves, but that like my mother was a manic depressive, she's mentally ill. And so for a number of years, I identified myself as the daughter of a manic depressive and all of the things that came with that, all of the things that I associated that with. And as human beings, we have this natural tendency to label everything. We just constantly want to like landmark everything, postmark everything, so that we can like properly identify it, so that we can understand it. But really just being mindful is really just the idea of being non-judgmental about all of these things, just being aware of them, observing them without judgment. But the mind's tendency is just to naturally judge everything, to label it. And so the more we can get present and just mindful of what's happening around us, the less judgment that we have over anything. Because ultimately nothing really has value except for the value that we place on it. Nothing's really good or bad except for our personal opinion of what is good or bad, right? And a lot of times we think that the world thinks exactly like we think. We have this whole inner dialogue in our head, and that we think that because we think something, that must be how everyone else thinks. But when you look at things like the political landscape in America, things of that nature right now, you really begin to see that not everyone is operating from the same place. We're not all operating from the same space of wisdom or self-awareness or responsibility or integrity, and there's a lot of finger pointing. And so this is something that I continuously bring up because really it's something that I had to become aware of, was that I was constantly doing this to people, and I was constantly blaming other people for how I was showing up. And I'll take it back to the experience with my parents, was that for most of my life, going far into my adulthood, I really blamed who I was on being the daughter of an alcoholic and being the daughter of someone who is manic depressive. I really didn't want to take responsibility for the fact that my life was my own to live and to create and to be responsible for. And so I did a lot of this to my parents. I did a lot of blaming. I had so much attachment to my childhood and my trauma and all of these things. And really all I was doing was just lacking self-accountability and really taking ownership for the fact that like my life is mine now. So I got caught up in not only the storms of my present moment, because I told you, I believed that if there was no such thing as bad luck, I'd have no luck at all, right? That was my belief. But compounded by that was this belief that everything up until that point even wasn't my fault, that everything had to do with how I was treated by my parents, or the neglect, or the traumatic situations, or things that I experienced. But really it wasn't until I came to a place of just ownership of my own shit, right? And just ownership of the fact that like, well, I'm an adult now. I'm pretty sure that it's time to start creating a more ideal life. I haven't lived with my parents since 1999, so maybe it's really time to just start taking ownership of my life and start realizing that I'm creating this reality. This really has nothing to do anymore with anyone in my past. And I was just being very ineffective in the present moment. So again, like a big part of this transformation and this change for me was taking time to be still, taking time to get present, and really taking time to own who I was and how other people were showing up in my life. And this comes back to the idea of finding peace in the storm. Because as I mentioned before in these conversations, everyone that's in your space is really just a reflection of you. They're just feedback for you. So even when things are going terribly wrong, it's important to start looking at yourself and how you have created some of this. And you may look at things like the weather and think that that has nothing to do with you, but I assure you that there's not one thing that exists in our reality that you're not responsible for. It doesn't mean that you necessarily take ownership for it, but you are nonetheless responsible for its creation. So, and just getting more self-aware, you start to look at the parts of yourself that are out of control. You look at things like the weather and start to realize like, wow, like I thought of the wind, and for me, it just like really, it made me think of like rage and fury and just this incredible momentum that could barely be stopped. And like I thought about it in two ways. In one way, it was like, oh man, like this is horrible, and like I'm out of control, and I'm just like, I'm destroying things in my path and all of these things. There's that side of it. But then on the other side of it, when you think of the power of wind and really the force behind wind, you realize your own power and your ability to really destroy the things in your life that are no longer working for you, the things that are no longer serving you. So you don't always have to look at everything as the bad thing, although that might be what it is for you. And self-awareness is just realizing like which one it is. Self-awareness is not always a matter of like seeing the rainbows and butterflies and things. In fact, usually it's quite the opposite. Like the people that we experience that we don't get along with, that we have resistance to, things of that nature, are just really parts of ourselves that we have yet to allow ourselves to experience, or have so much resistance to our connection with it that we continuously perpetuate it. So the more you can just become aware of it, the greater your opportunity is to just shift it right out of your space. And it either completely goes away, or it really transforms into a new perspective for you. So like I said, at first I was like, oh, the wind is this like terrible thing, and it's this destructive force. But then I think about like how important for me it's been to tap into that kind of power and that kind of force to really destroy the things that were destroying me, destroy the kinds of thoughts and patterns in my life that were completely taking over my life and really not serving me. And then you start to look at force and power as something actually really great and really huge opportunities for you to be able to transform your life. Because as I said, really nothing has any value except for the value that we place on it. So once our perspective on things starts to change, we can really start to tap into that power in a different way. So when you're experiencing things that just don't feel comfortable, that don't feel good, that really are less than ideal, to take the time to get more present, to get more still, to be able to get more clarity in that moment, to understand what that's representing in our life first and foremost. Like, just take the time to get present and look at the situation, evaluate it in terms of who you are and how you're showing up in the world. And then from there, you have the opportunity to use that as your power, and to recognize the power of whatever that situation is to be able to really transform your life. So I recently lost 2 friends last month, both related to heart-related issues. And in the passing of one of my very best friends, I ended up connecting with one of his family members. And in our conversations, she was sharing some of the things that have been coming up for her. And thankfully, we've gotten to a place in our conversations where she's now able to recognize, from a self-awareness standpoint, the opportunities in all of this loss. Because it was like, quite honestly, it was a very devastating loss for both of us. That was one of her closest family members, and for me, it was one of my best friends. And she really is a mirror for me in terms of what I still have yet to deal with in terms of the grieving and coping and things of that nature. And that was a really big storm in my life, because when that happened, the day that it happened, I just felt like I got hit by a truck. Like, it just felt like it came out of nowhere. It felt like I didn't know, I no longer knew what was up or down, or I just felt like I had lost control of my inner GPS that day. And thankfully, I kind of regained it very quickly, almost the following day, thanks to my meditation practice, thanks to just taking time to be still, and also just being open to all of the signs around us. Because I can honestly tell you that within 24 hours of his passing, his presence was completely made known to me through a number of different things, including like coming to me in my sleep, and then just showing me he was there in almost every corner that I turned. And in being open to this and keeping my heart open and my mind open, I was able to experience his presence, because energy really, it never dies. You can't create it or destroy it. It just has the ability to change forms. And so I just became aware of the fact that he had just changed forms and was still able to communicate with me, just in a different way. And so in doing so, I was also able to inspire his family member by sharing some of the experiences that I had, and really assuring her that, like, although he was gone from the physical form, that he was still very, very much here, in spiritual form and in energy. So I just say that to say, that's one of the most, I think in my experience, has been one of the most devastating storms of my life, has just been the loss of friends and family members and things of that nature. And in the last 2 years, I've had a great deal of loss, like really devastating loss of people, whether it be that I had really close relationships with them, or even just maybe not as close relationships with them, but the way that they passed was very traumatic or tragic, or just, these things that we tie all these stories to, we have all these vivid memories of. And so it took a lot for me to just get present and understand that, like, their death was not the end of my life. For a long time, and this goes back to my parents again too, like, I thought that if my mother was mentally ill, that it wasn't okay for me to be okay. It wasn't okay for me to live a happy and joyous life, because she was over there sick and miserable and medicated. And what did that mean about me if I was going on with my life and she was still over there suffering? But ultimately, what ended up happening was that by becoming more present and practicing more acts of self-awareness and self-love, she ended up shifting, which I had wanted to do my whole life, but I had no tools to do that, because I was trying to make her do something. And the only person that we can effectively change is us. So if you're facing, family members that are ill, or a rambunctious child, a son or daughter, or whatever it is, excuse me, it really is crucial for you to start taking some time to look at yourself. Because as I said, everybody is really just feedback for us. And so the people that are in your space are literally feedback for how you're showing up in the world. And the more you can get aware of how you're showing up in the world, which is creating all of this landscape around you, the faster you can start to change things, and the more your life will transform into a more ideal setting, because it's really just about taking ownership of you. And not only taking ownership of you, but really taking time to discipline yourself, to be able to take time to be still, to listen to your heart, to listen to source. I mean, for me, like, my connection to my heart is really my connection to my source. It's my connection to my higher power. My mind is this like defense mechanism that is constantly trying to protect me and serve me from a place of the past. And while its intentions are relatively good, they really don't serve me in a positive way or help me grow in any capacity. So it's taken a long time for me to really be able to genuinely quiet my mind, to get to a place where I can start connecting with my heart, start connecting with source, and really start operating from a place of peace. Because, you know, when you have peace in your life, it becomes a lot easier to start making decisions. Not to say that you have peace in your life to become complacent, but you have peace in your life to the fact that there's not all this outside noise that's distracting you from being more deliberate and being more effective. So I know I brought up the story about my sister before, my oldest sister, who takes care of my parents. And one day I had spoken to her, and she was like, man, I don't know, like, everybody wants something from me. Nobody even asks how I'm doing and all this stuff. So at the end of our conversation, I just stopped and I was like, well, how are you doing? And she was, you know, kind of taken off guard that someone actually gave a shit how she was doing. So she answered the question, and then, you know, she continued to go down that hallway of, like, you know, the pity party and martyrdom and all of that. But instead of enrolling in her story, I just started simply asking her questions about, you know, how would it feel if everybody that you took care of was just okay already? Like, if you just didn't have to take care of these people because they were taking care of themselves. And she was like, that would be amazing. I was like, all right, well, how would that feel? And she said, well, or how would you feel ideally, you know, in that situation? And she said, you know, I would just have more peace and quiet in my life. I said, okay, perfect. So from that space, then what would you do if you had more peace and quiet? And literally she couldn't answer the question because she had been so caught up in this story in her mind about all of the chaos in her life and all the people she takes care of, which is a choice, that she was totally disconnected from herself and the desires of her heart. She couldn't even tell me that if she was in the ideal situation, what she would want to do or what her life would look and feel like. And so I just continued to really give her a lot of undivided attention, which, you know, just encourages other people to do the same for themselves. So, you know, I know that we're in a time where everybody's super, like, wrapped up in their phone. You go out to dinner with people and everybody's like this. Nobody's paying attention to each other. Totally guilty of it. But, you know, how does it feel when somebody puts their phone down and just starts to give you their undivided attention? How much more compelled are you to give them your undivided attention? So really it's just about leading by example and really just becoming aware of the fact that when things are not ideal in our lives, when we're facing these challenges in our lives and these storms, so to speak, to really start looking at ourselves and start evaluating ourselves in a non-judgmental way, to just start getting honest and real about how we're showing up and why maybe some of these things are transpiring. It's not always going to mean that you have a full understanding of the why, but it will give you a better and clearer understanding of who you are and how you're showing up in the world. And in that lies your power to be able to really start creating change. So the more hectic your life is, the more it's really important for you to get quiet and get still with yourself and start to look at the parts of yourself that are that, or that are resisting being that, which is also perpetuating it. So self-awareness is not always like, oh, well, that's who I am. Like, you know, somebody in your space, you're like, oh my gosh, that's definitely my twin. Like, that's my mirror. No. A lot of times the people that you have the most resistance to are the parts of yourself that you have the most resistance to. So, like, I have this person who's, like, always on, right? This person is, like, I feel like he's an actor. Like, every time I interact with him, he's always, like, playing a part. And for a long time, I was completely unaware of the fact that like this was a huge part of me. I was totally unaware of the fact that there was a part of me that was always looking to be the center of attention. And like that seems so evident as a performer and someone who actually literally gets on stage and captivates people's attention and energy. But there was still part of me in my day-to-day life that couldn't understand that, you know, how you do one thing is how you do all things. So yeah, while I might do this on stage, I was completely unaware of the fact that I did this in my day-to-day life too. And our life isn't so compartmentalized to think that, you know, that we're only one way in one situation. It really is true. How you do one thing is how you do all things. So just looking at the parts of myself that were completely in denial of the fact that that was a part of me, that like, you know, it was just like always wanting attention. And then when I saw other people that were trying to get attention, just completely judging them. And it was so ironic because really when I started to look at myself, I was like, wow, that's just who I am. Like I'm a singer, I'm a songwriter, I work in film and television, and I do all these things that get so much attention, right? So in my day-to-day life, of course I'm gonna naturally go into that space of doing things because that's what I'm used to. I'm used to being on a stage. But it was just funny for me, and it was a great lesson for me to learn that, you know, this person that I had so much resistance to that was showing up like this was so much a reflection of me. And it was just a lack of awareness on my own part to be accountable for that and to understand that that's how I was showing up in the world. So just want to kind of circle back again and start talking about this idea of finding peace in the storm. Because like I said, for a number of years, I had a lot of experience with just getting really, really trapped in my past and trapped in my emotions, and really convincing myself that instead of having emotions, I was my emotions. So just understanding that the experiences that you have in your life are really just feedback for how you're showing up, feedback for how you're reacting to things. And when you think about like the idea of, like, let's say you are watching people get into a fight, right? You're watching people get into a fight, you're witnessing a fight, but instead of just sitting back and observing the fight, you start joining the fight. You start throwing punches, you start kicking, and so the fight escalates, it ultimately gets worse. And a lot of times this is what we're creating in our lives. Like, instead of just observing the fight, we start to enroll in it, and we start to put our gloves on, and we're in the fight with it. And instead of it just passing by and the fight subsiding, like, we literally just keep it going. You know, we burn the fire even brighter by enrolling in it, by participating in it, by believing in it, by, you know, just making it our own, instead of, like our emotions, you know, just observing them and being like, all right, well, I feel the part of me that is this. I feel the part of me that is either out of control or rageful or hurtful or whatever it is. And just like, you know, as I mentioned earlier, our emotions are really just like the weather. They really just come and go. They're really just temporary. You think of them about like the ebb and flow of tides as they come in and out. They're incessantly going in and out. There's not one time of the day that waves do not stop from flowing, really. And so this is just like our emotions. Like, there's never going to be a part of our day that we aren't feeling or thinking something. But that's not to say that that feeling or thinking something is the same thing all the time. It's not. It's very dynamic. It's going to naturally change. But the more we resist it, the more we perpetuate it. And though it's not ever exactly the same, we create kind of patterns of it, and we get stuck in this holding pattern that can be really, really dangerous and start creating things in our lives that are really less than ideal and really don't reflect the things that we really want in our lives. And there's going to be a part of our mind that's telling us like, well, that's not what I want, and that's not what I wanted to create. But in a lot of ways it was, because if it wasn't, we wouldn't have created it. So just about getting really honest with ourselves, and this is again where self-awareness comes in, to really just become aware of the things that you're doing, aware how you're showing up, and then as such being able to be accountable for it without judging it. And that's really the hardest part. Like, the non-judgmental part of it is super challenging as you're developing the muscle, as you're developing the discipline to be, at least it was for me. That was my experience of it, was that it was so challenging for me to develop that muscle because I had so much more practice doing everything else. So it really is a matter of discipline. It's a matter of deciding that you're going to start thinking something different, that you're going to start changing your mind about some of your beliefs. And something that I started my day with outside of my regular practice is something called Self-Discovery Life Mastery. But I'm also starting to integrate a 21-day meditation experience through Oprah and Deepak Chopra. And this morning, the email that we got to kind of start off this cycle, this 21-day cycle, was about the idea of mantras and how important mantras are in terms of really changing your mind over a period of time. So one thing that I would definitely like to probably wrap it up in the next couple minutes, but is just talk about this idea of mantras and their importance of creating more peace in those storms. Because really, the more you can convince yourself of something, the more you start to align with that belief, and that's how your reality starts to unfold before you. So just this idea of mantras and really finding mantras that are aligned with your vision and what you see for your life. They don't have to look like anything. In fact, they usually don't look like anything of what your life is now. They're really aligned with the vision of your life and for the change in your life and the transformation of your life or your ideal life. So it's important to start thinking about mantras that you can use while you're facing these times of turmoil, facing these storms in your life, so that you have an anchor to hold on to when everything else feels out of control. So that when everything looks the opposite of what you want it to, feels the opposite of what you want to experience, that you have something to really hold on to and put your attention on that is more ideal. So maybe you're dealing with like a financial situation and maybe you lost a job, whatever the case is. So then maybe you just want to find a mantra for yourself that really exemplifies the kind of abundance that you want to experience in your life that isn't really happening right now. And what that does is it starts to develop that muscle. It starts to develop an alignment with that vision, but also you start to become more of that. And you stop being so attached to that old story. You stop being so enrolled in the brokenness or whatever the case is, and you start to really change your trajectory. And you change it really magnetically through aligning with it in a real way. And it's not just thinking it, but it's really just aligning with it with your heart and your mind, which is, as I always say, like that's really where divine design takes place. When your heart and your mind can align, that's where everything can really start to unfold. Because until then, you're kind of working against each other a lot of times. Like your heart knows the truth, but your mind's like, yeah, but, and it'll come up with like all these different reasons for why that can't be. So the more you can just get present and really, I think that the most important thing in creating a mantra is doing it from a place of presence, not doing it from a place of, all this chaos and in a place where you really feel disempowered to be able to create your reality. But in a place of presence where you feel like you're 100% in command of your reality, that you are aligned with the fact that you do create your reality from a place of self-awareness where you know that you are responsible for everything that is in your space, in your landscape. And from there, just being able to create a mantra that really is aligned with how you want your ideal life to look and feel like. And so I just encourage you today to find a mantra for yourself, to start anchoring yourself to be able to keep that peace within the midst of the storms of your life. Because the storms are always going to be different, right? We're always going to experience different kinds of storms. But they're always going to be there. It's just like the weather. Like just like our emotions are going to come and go and all of this, the weather is going to do the same thing. So really, like if you ever just need a reminder of that, look outside the window and realize that you never experience the same day twice. A rainstorm is different every time it rains. Thunder is different every time you hear it. Lightning is different every time you see it. And so our emotions are just like that. But the one thing that we can remain constant is really our set of beliefs. So the more that we can start to create a set of beliefs that are aligned with our vision, the the more we can let those storms kind of rage in our lives and just relax into them, knowing that we're anchored to what our vision is, what our real truth is, what our higher self knows that is completely possible for our lives, despite whatever is taking place here. Because our vision really is something that it's aligned with our faith and our heart to know that something greater beyond what our eyes see is completely possible and is real. And if it wasn't, we wouldn't think it or feel it. So just to know that that reality is very true, and by creating mantras for ourselves, it really helps us, like I said, just develop that muscle and remind ourselves that we are completely capable of changing our trajectory and making a new decision in any single moment in our day. So as I mentioned at the beginning of this, I did actually start simultaneously recording on my computer. This has been an ongoing series of live chats. And really the objective behind it is to get real-time engagement with people, to be able to really connect with people and engage our attention and energy at the same time. But what I do with the chats is I do end up saving them, and then they're available for 24 hours so that if you do miss them, because I had a number of people that were really disappointed that they missed chats, I wanted to be able to share them. So in this way, I'm going to start archiving them. But my most direct way of reaching you initially is going to continue to be through Instagram Live, just because I found the value in having these real-time conversations. And sometimes people are super participatory, and other times they're just kind of watching, which is fine too. Really, my objective is ultimately just to share my experiences in hopes that we can all become more self-aware, create an enlightened civilization so that we can start telling a new story, kind of shift the paradigm from this old story of death and tragedy and all of these storms, right? And I've mentioned this before, but I was recently on a conference call with Deepak Chopra, and he was really talking about just this crucial thing about telling a new story. And so again, this goes back to the idea of the mantras and just, aligning with your vision and reminding yourself that that vision is real despite whatever things you're experiencing on the outside. And as you're experiencing those less than ideal things on the outside, becoming more aware of the fact that it is just feedback for how you're showing up in your life. So the more bad luck, so to speak, that you have, the more self-aware you become to understand that you are accountable for that. But then the next step in self-awareness is really self-love, because it comes down to accepting the fact that that is a part of yourself, and then forgiving yourself for feeling like that, or forgiving your mind for thinking like that. Because from a place of acceptance and forgiveness, you can really move on from that. You can transcend all of those things and start to create a different reality. And it does take a lot of practice. I introduced a friend to part of my practice last week, and I just told him, this is ultimately a decision, and you have to decide every single day that this is something that you're going to do. Every single day you have to decide that you're going to do something for yourself over something else that you already know. You have to start breaking some patterns, and, maybe you sit and scroll through Instagram for an hour every single day. So maybe taking 5 minutes out of that hour to start, really digging into yourself, to start becoming more aware of yourself. And over time, that discipline builds. And then really what ends up happening is that you start really enjoying it, because you start to see the results of that discipline. And from there, you become more motivated to continue doing it every single day. There's definitely going to be days that you don't feel like doing it. There's definitely going to be days. I was just talking to one of my friends this morning about, doing my practice every day and meditating every day and making sure that I'm always doing this. But I had to get to a place where if I didn't do my practice on a day, that instead of wasting my time and energy beating myself up for the fact that I didn't make time for it, that I was creating the space to accept myself for that, and recognizing my wins for the day, and recognizing the things that I did during my day that were actually kind of meditative, that weren't a formal meditation practice, but that, whether it was coloring or drawing or writing music or whatever it is, things that get my attention all the way out and really, tap into source, tap into my higher self. So I always just encourage everyone to find a practice that works for yourself. Whether it's not a one size fits all, and everybody's operating from where they're at. So I never ever force my practice on anyone, because I understand that, it really just isn't one size fits all, but it's about finding what works for you so that you can integrate it into your life every single day and start to create more peace in your life. That's why there's so many different meditation practices, yoga practices, is because everybody's operating from where they're at. So just, accepting yourself for where you're at, not beating yourself up for where you're at, not beating yourself up for what's going on in your life, even as you become self-aware. Sometimes that can be challenging, because then you start to realize that it's all your fault, so to speak. But it's really not about placing blame. It's really just about being accountable. So the more accountable you can be, and the more compassionate you can be towards yourself, the faster you can really start to evolve into your greater self and your greatest self. So I just wanted to start off this week with that, because it's Monday, and as I said, we had this crazy raging storm in Narragansett last night going into this morning that literally ripped off the window off the house and did all this destruction. And so for me, it just was my reminder of how important it is to maintain my peace during those storms, and really just remind ourselves that we are fully capable of staying in command, despite the fact that sometimes it feels like we're really not in control. We are always ultimately in control of ourselves. We are not in control of other people or the weather or the things that we experience sometimes, but we are always 100% in command of ourselves when we choose to be. So I hope you guys found some value in this conversation today. I will be announcing the next Instagram live chat via Twitter. I also usually share it in my Insta story before I go live. I announce what time I'll be going live. And I'm still working on developing the YouTube series that I have coined as Awaremess to Awareness, just to really talk about these really, really important topics of self-awareness and self-love, and just finding ways to integrate them in everyday practical ways, because not all of us are completely open to having maybe a formal meditation or prayer practice or whatever the case may be. But just understand that you can really find some natural rhythm in your life by tuning more into to your greatest self, and to taking the time to be quiet or be still. So maybe you don't have a formal meditation or prayer practice, but maybe 5 minutes in the morning, you're not looking at your phone, you're not watching television, you're not listening to the radio, you're just sitting with yourself. And the more that you do this, again, it's just developing a muscle. And your greater ability to do that will create the space for you to be able to start making more deliberate decisions, start changing your mind from a lot of these different patterns that we get stuck in. And so I really hope that you guys find value in today's conversation. I will save it and make it available for the next 24 hours, and I'll definitely announce the next conversation that we have. Thanks for everybody that joined. And thanks for everyone that will continue to watch over the next 24 hours. And, but I hope you guys have an awesome day, and I hope that you find some ways to start finding peace within all of your storms today. Have a great day, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.